Hello, everybody. Today we are going to start with a new reading comprehension lesson. This is week 30. The theme for this week is a very interesting theme. It's very close to your age and it discusses all the problems that you as teenagers face. The theme for this week is adolescence. As you can see in the picture shows teenagers, shows adolescents in a picture. These teenagers are very close to your age. Of course, every one of you can face a problem with his parents, with his teachers, with his peers, with his friends at school, because this stage in your life is a turning point. Now, in this video, we are going to watch
Peer pressure is talked about so much that it can seem a little bit like a joke, especially when you're a teenager. But actually experiencing peer pressure can be so uncomfortable. Like, did you really want to run that 10K with your super athletic roommates? Maybe not. But they just asked so many times that it was easier to go do it than listen to them ask again. You've probably been told that to resist peer pressure, you should just say no. But surprise, that doesn't always seem to work. And neither did that DARE program that was everywhere in the 90s. Psychologically speaking, it totally makes sense that we want to give in to social norms, but that doesn't mean it's always a good thing. Thankfully, researchers have come up with some better ideas for resisting peer pressure. So the next time your roommates try and drag you on a run, you'll be prepared. Psychologists believe that we're basically hardwired to want to feel like we belong. After all, in our evolutionary past, cooperating with groups was necessary for people to survive. Because of this, social norms have a huge effect on our behavior, especially ones called injunctive norms, which tell us how society thinks we should behave in certain situations. These norms aren't necessarily bad. For example, they're part of why you'd stop at a red light or pay a friend back when they loan you money. But following them can also cause us to act in risky or dangerous ways to fit in. In an early demonstration of this effect from 1968, 58 male college students were asked to fill out questionnaires about going to an urban school. Then, while they did, the room they were in started to fill with smoke. When the participants were in the room alone, most of them went to get help. But when they were in groups, they were much less likely to, which seems pretty weird. One possible explanation for this is that the participants looked at other people's behavior to try and figure out how they should respond. If the other people didn't seem stressed by the smoke, they might have decided that it wasn't something they had to worry about. Now, this was just an experiment, but things like this happen all the time in real life. Like, imagine you're hanging out with your buddies and someone turns on the worst, most horrible sounding music you can possibly imagine. Except you don't say anything. And neither does anybody else. So you're all just sort of politely sitting there, and you might come to the conclusion that your friends actually enjoy this terrible music, and maybe you're the problem. Psychologists actually have a name for this concept: pluralistic ignorance. It's the idea that a group might feel a certain way, but nobody in the group realizes it because everyone is keeping their true feelings to themselves. Because of this, you might come to think a certain social norm exists, like that smoky rooms are totally normal, even if everybody else is secretly just as uncomfortable with the situation. Pluralistic ignorance can play a huge role in peer pressure, and psychologists have also suggested it might be a factor in the heavy drinking that often occurs on college campuses. In a 1993 study at Princeton University, researchers asked 132 undergrads how they felt about drinking. They also asked them how they thought the average student felt about it. Participants generally said that they felt less okay with heavy drinking at college than the hypothetical average student. But turns out that this was actually something a lot of people said. In other words, most people thought their peers were way more okay with heavy drinking than they actually were. Recent studies have also confirmed that pluralistic ignorance plays a role in all kinds of other situations too, from cigarette smoking and drug use to beliefs about mental health treatments. So it's not only relevant to that lecture your high school teachers might have given you before you went off to college. The nice thing is, though, this concept can also help you resist peer pressure. See, people often give in to something because they assume everyone agrees it's right. So psychologists suggested that, if you know about pluralistic ignorance, it might reduce the pressure you feel to conform with the group. And research has backed this up. In a 1998 study with 143 college students, knowing about pluralistic ignorance helped one group drink less compared to students who didn't learn about it. And a 2018 study about gender norms showed similar results. When men were shown that most people were in favor of gender equality, they were more likely to say they supported it as well, compared to groups who were told something else. While there may have been other variables at play in both of these studies, this suggests that having a little psychology knowledge in your back pocket can totally help you out in the real world. It's like having a secret window into your friends' brains. So the next time someone puts on that horrible playlist, speak up. You may find that other people were just as uncomfortable as you were, but didn't want to be the first person to admit it. Thanks for watching this episode of SciShow Psych, and special thanks to our patrons on Patreon. There's so much psychology to explore out there, and we're thankful for all of you who make it possible. If you want to help us keep making episodes like this one, you can go to patreon.com/scishow.
In a good way or in a bad way. You might face peer pressure as a good way when someone advises you or motivates you to do something good, and you might face peer pressure when someone is encouraging you to do something bad, like drinking alcohol, having drugs, smoking, doing any immoral actions. Okay, so this is what we mean by peer pressure. And today our story is about a person who was pressured by his peers in order to smoke, and we're going to see what happened with him. Let's talk about the genre. The genre is a personal narrative. When we say personal narrative, it means someone is writing his own story, something that happened with him, and a story that happened with him. How is a personal narrative organized? It is organized by time and sequence of events. Of course, events are written chronologically in order. And the purpose of this personal narrative is to entertain the reader and to tell about events or series of events that happened with the writer. There are different forms of a personal narrative. You can find it in different ways: in a diary, in an autobiography, in an article, in a story, in a blog article, and so on. And of course, it has many features. We mean that the personal narrative has many different features. What are the features that a personal narrative have? It tells a story from the writer's life, a story that happened in the writer's life. It uses I and me. Why does it use I and me? Because it's being told from the first point of view, and the writer is writing something that happened with him. So he uses these pronouns. It expresses the writer's thoughts and feelings. It develops the experience with narrative techniques such as dialogue and description. It means there is a conversation or a dialogue between the characters of the story in the story, and there is, of course, a description. But the writer describes the people that are sharing him the story, the people, the places that the story happened in, and his feelings, and so on. It begins with an interesting lead and gives a sense of closure at the end. So this story begins with a sense of interesting lead, motivational. It attracts the reader. It allows the reader to attracts the reader to continue reading, to never stop, to have the curiosity to know what's going to happen next. The skill is the character traits. When we say character traits, it means we are describing the inner traits of someone. It means we are describing his behavior, his attitude, and his personality. This is what we mean by character traits. So when we say character traits, it means we are not describing his outer appearance. We are describing his personality based on his behavior and his attitude throughout the story. Of course, you are going to use some adjectives in order to describe a person. Last week we covered the adjectives lesson, and we learned how to describe a person and how to compare using the comparative adjectives and superlative adjectives. And here there is a chart of negative and positive traits that you can use in order to describe someone. Lead in question. What is peer pressure? We already said. Is peer pressure the influence exerted by a peer group encouraging individuals to change their attitudes, values, or behavior in order to conform to group norms? Yes, sometimes yes. Sometimes your friends might ask you to do something bad, otherwise they won't talk to you anymore, and so on. Set a purpose for reading. As you read the selection, figure out how peer pressure compels you to do the same things as the other people of your age if you want them to like you. So, for example, some of your friends might ask you to smoke. If you don't smoke, it means you're not a man, you are not a grown-up, you're still afraid of your parents. They start putting pressure on you. So you will be, and you'll do this no matter what, even if you know that this is wrong, but you'll do it. Peer pressure. This story talks about a person who was 14 years old, and his friends were putting a pressure on him. They were encouraging him to smoke, and he did. His mom discovered this, but he was very honest, and he told her what happened. So his mom was very conscious, was very wise, and she allowed him to get rid of this bad habit. and how to say no. The most important thing during this stage in your life, to say no. If people are asking you to do something bad, say no. If people are asking you to steal, say no. To smoke, say no. To watch bad things, say no. You should be very strong in this stage. And even if your friends don't want you, if you are polite, if you're not doing the things that they do, never mind, you will find better friends than them. There are some exercises that you have to solve throughout the live sessions. Of course, we are going to solve them together, apart from the worksheet that also contains many exercises related to the lesson.